Thank you so much for joining us today for PRM's first Zoom panel. Super excited to be here. Thank you so much for our panelists for coming in and answering our questions and sharing their experiences. Hopefully we'll get to learn a lot today about a career in government communications and also the Ontario Internship Program. So for today's agenda, we're just going to go through arrivals, and then we're going to have an intro for our moderator, a land acknowledgement, an intro for our panelists, and then we'll get started. So for those of you who may not know us, we are PR Ramp. We organized this panel today, and we're basically a student association for students and recent grads with less than 2 years of industry experience. We focus on Canadian communications and public relations students. And since our launch in August 2020, we've built a roster of over 180 mentors and have connected over 200 mentees for 1-hour virtual mentorship sessions, which is our flagship initiative. We've been featured on 3 podcasts, PR Delivered, Create Community, and The Pivot. And we launched an online community on Discord in November where we host weekly Ask Me Anything sessions where you're welcome to drop in, and we bring different industry professionals every single week from all sorts of sectors, and you can literally just ask whatever you want. It's a super casual chat, and I would recommend that you join the Discord server if you haven't yet. So today, our moderator is Skaidra, who's a PR Ramp mentor, and she's honestly one of the kindest souls I know. She currently works at the Ontario Digital Service, so she herself is an expert in building a government communications career, and you can find her on Twitter at Skaidra P. I'll hand it over to Skaidra now.
For sure. Thanks so much, Arvind. Yeah, so before I officially kick off, I do just want to acknowledge that where I'm gathering from anyway is traditionally known as a gathering place for many nations, including Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I personally acknowledge that I am meeting in the area covered by Treaty 13, also known as the Toronto Purchase, and I pay my respects to the Mississaugas of the Credit. But I also encourage all of you to also check out which land you are joining from and really what it means to honor the land in which you work and conduct your day-to-day services on. I know for me personally, it's just really important to reiterate that freedom and democracy is fragile and that we have to do our best to honor those who came before us in every way we can. So next slide. I think that was it. Do we have any more slides? No, I think that was it, right, Arvind? Right, our panelists. Okay, great. So before I formally introduce our panelists, I just want to quickly share, how is it that we came about with this panel? So I had shared the launch of the Ontario Internship Program application on my personal LinkedIn, and it kind of went mini viral. A lot of people in the Humber PR program, in the Generation PR network, in my alma mater Humber PR, and within the Centennial PR postgrad in Seneca, there was lots of shares. I got a lot of questions about, well, how do I apply to the communication stream? What was your experience like? And I was like, well, I'm definitely not the most knowledgeable person. I can only speak to my experiences. So I quickly approached Arvind and PR Ramp, and I was like, listen, how can we create a space for other perspectives to emerge, because everyone's had a slightly different experience with this program. And not only to talk about the Ontario Internship Program, while yes, it's an incredible entry point to government, to also chat about what a career in government actually looks like. I'm someone who actually went through the Humber PR program, and there was little mention of government opportunities. There was a big push on agency. There was a really big push on working with consultant groups and industry members and corporations. And I always knew, like, no, I want to work in government. I want to work in government. And so I'm here to open up the opportunities, open up your options, and hear from people who are truly brilliant and truly have a lot to share and have done really interesting things and have gone in different like movements, pathways in government since joining. And yes, we've all been in the OIB program, but I do also want to mention, and we will address this topic in our chat, but it took me 3 tries to get into this program. I did not get in my first try. And Leo didn't get in his first try. Naya didn't get in her first try. Krista, did you get in your first try? I can't remember.
I did.
You did. Okay. So Krista's a unicorn. No, I'm just kidding. But all this to say that, keep at it. It's worth it. There's other opportunities. We're here to support you. So without further ado, let's introduce our awesome panelists and get to our first question. So we've got Naya Bajaj. So she's a senior communication consultant at the Ontario Public Service. She herself has been a part of the OIP program when she joined in 2009, but she's then gone on to advise ministers' offices and has worked in the ministries of Aboriginal Affairs and training colleges and universities, and at the Ontario Heritage Trust. But what I think is also really interesting about Naya, she's moved from entering as a communication stream OIP, and now she works in policy. So I'd love to also, expand on that when we chat a bit with Naya. Our next panelist is Krista Schwab. She's a senior strategic communications advisor at the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. Krista and I actually worked together at MTO last year. And before that, she's worked at the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. She's done really cool things on digital and social media and change management and digital, specifically initiatives focused on climate change. So also incredibly interesting background. And then finally, we've got Leo, who is a current colleague of mine. He's incredible. He's a digital team lead at the Ontario Treasury Board of Secretariat. He works in the communications branch at TBS, as we refer to it. But like Krista, he's held many positions in digital and social media, and he's been in the public service since 2012. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off with our first question for each panelist. I do want to encourage, however, everyone joining us to ask questions in the chat. This is for you. So I will be monitoring the chat. I'm not here to talk. I'm here to take your questions and make this as engaging and as useful to you as possible. But I'm going to kick off we'll go to Krista, Naya, and then Leo. My first question is, why did you apply to the OIP program? Take us back to what headspace you were when you were thinking of applying, and let's go from there.
Thanks so much, Skaidra and PR Ramp for having us. So I had a lot of summer jobs and internships in the nonprofit sector, and I kind of thought that's where I would go. But at the end of my undergraduate degree, I was just applying to anything and everything, just trying to get a job, as I'm sure many of you feel the same way. And the OIP program, it really appealed to me because it seemed like a really good foot in the door. And it was also a longer contract, because a lot of internships, they're only a few months. And this one was at the time a two-year contract. And I think now it's down to 1 year, but that job security would be amazing to me. So that's something that really was appealing as well. And I just threw my hat in the ring, and it ended up working out. So that's my little spiel.
I love it. And again, the key is applying to everything, seeing what sticks. Common in reality. Naya.
So my journey is a little bit different. When I was at U of T, I actually worked in student government as sort of a student bureaucrat, as it were. So I supported the elected officials that we had. And U of T is one of the largest student unions in the country. So it was quite engaging. And I thought, well, I really like doing this. Could I do this for the rest of my life in a place that pays better than student government? And I was like, right, there are real governments that have people that support elected officials. Maybe I should just do that. And I didn't know how to do it. And then I took one political science course, and the political science student union was like, come to a program about careers. And I was like, I don't know, man, I have nothing to do this afternoon. I'm going to check it out. And they were like, oh, there's all these internships you could get. And the OIP was the longest one and one of the few that paid. So I was like, obviously have to apply for this. As a keener, I applied in the year that I was graduating, which you can technically do, but it makes you maybe slightly less competitive than people who have graduated and had some work experience. So I didn't get in the first year that I applied. It's a 3-stage application process, I think, still. And I made it to stage 3 and then didn't get in, which was a little disheartening. So I applied the following year with a year of work under my belt and made it back to stage 3, sat down with the same interviewers who looked at me and said, "Oh, you're here again," which is a terrifying thing to hear, and then made it. So it's quite possible to get in on your second or third try. But yeah, I'd always known I wanted to be in government, and here I am.
I love it. And Leo?
Yeah, for me, bit of a different trajectory, almost like the opposite of Naya's actually. I don't have a background, like an educational background in communications. I actually studied political science. So for me, I knew I was interested in government. I was passionate about public service. But how I first got into government was I was actually in a policy role. But having done that for like about a year, I knew it wasn't really doing it for me. Like I wanted to do something more creative, just because that's been a passion of mine my whole life. So one of my managers actually suggested that I apply for this program because I was out of school at that time within a year. I think that's the eligibility period. Suggested I actually apply for that as a way to get into communications without having that necessary background. So I was able to kind of merge the two, my interest plus my education and work experience in getting into the communication stream. And I've been doing that ever since. So I've been very happy and very fortunate to be able to work and find something I'm passionate about and care about and being able to grow into as a role in government.
So let's kind of enter some of the things that you've learned while working in government. We enter with some assumptions of what it might be like to work in government, one of them being, perhaps it's slower, or perhaps people are going into government for a pension or for a 9-to-5 stable job. But I think, there's so many different circumstances, there's so many different pathways, there's so many different things that are thrown at government that I personally have gained a lot of appreciation for, having worked here now for 2 years. And so I was wondering if maybe Leo, you can kind of kick us off on some of the surprises, some of the things that have really just really taken you on a pleasant journey throughout your career in communications and government.
Yeah, I guess like joining government at the beginning, it's a very different world than private sector in terms of what the brand is for government. Like people think of government as this big ambiguous thing. And that kind of mentality flows out to a lot of the projects and announceables that we have to work with. So it's operating without that sense of direction or guidance sometimes, and being able to feel things out and make recommendations to build that out in the communications that we do. I think that's one of the challenges that's ongoing. And also the fact that government can change. So when a different party's in power, like the mandates can shift on a dime, and being able to be responsive and agile with the way that we treat those things and with respect to how we communicate that to the public, that's also one of the challenges. And I would say that overall, one of the things that was very surprising to me is as an intern, especially, like you don't get to choose where you end up. So where you end up can be very different than what you studied and necessarily what you're interested in. So I think keeping an open mind helps when you're an intern or just like applying to jobs in general. And as a communications professional, to just have the mentality of like, you are not your audience per se, like, and to understand that like who you're communicating to is not yourself, but to be able to understand that and digest that and build a plan around that is kind of like the big learning curve for anyone, especially if you're young, like joining in. Like I didn't feel comfortable in my writing skills. I didn't feel comfortable in like having that subject matter expertise, but you grow into that for sure. And there's a big support system behind everything you do, and ask a lot of questions, and getting to know that is part of what helps you succeed in a role like this.
I love that. And like, just really quickly, Leo, maybe you can also share some of the work you did at the ministry, like on the social side, like talk to us a little bit about like running an Instagram account or like a Twitter account, and the work that you've done on sort of the social digital side. Because I think a lot of folks here are interested to learn a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, so I was lucky. I joined a team at the Ministry of Environment when I first started as an intern. and actually got to work with Krista. She was an intern, I think, that came into the program after myself. So we worked together quite a bit on that stuff. But yeah, it was when I first started, this is dating myself a bit, but it was the earlier days of social media. So the ministry was really only active on Twitter and Facebook at the time. We've since grown to LinkedIn. We're on Instagram too now. And just a lot of the integrations and delivery of the communications across those channels was very new to us at the time. So a big thing for us that we always fell back on was storytelling, and being able to connect with audiences that way. Like we always operate on like content is king, but like context is everything. Being able to frame your communications in a way that resonates with people and meet them on the channels that they're active on was something that we prided ourselves in. And that meant like getting out there in the world, shooting videos, telling stories with the actual stakeholders, the end users of these very high level and maybe broad government policies and programs. Things like climate change incentives and electric vehicle incentives that were big under the previous government. That was something that we got to really dig into and build a storytelling strategy around. And you can definitely check out the channels at On Environment to see some of the work we've done. It's still on there for all to see.
I love that. Maybe as I ask this question to Krista, Leo, you can drop some of those links in the chat because I think it's really worth sharing it. It's incredible the work that has been produced on these channels. Krista, talk to me about some of your early days in the internship program and where you landed, and some of the things that you've picked up and learned along the way.
Sure, thanks. So it's interesting. I did say before, I was interested in the nonprofit sector. I was kind of interested in government, but I didn't really know a lot about government at the time when I was applying for the OIP. My biggest reference to working in government was the TV show Parks and Rec, which really shows, I think, that I did not have a lot of knowledge. But the internship program is really great, a great learning opportunity. And actually, on my second day of the internship, I had to work at the Climate Summit of the Americas, which brought like hundreds of governments together for this huge event. And like Al Gore was a speaker, and it was quite intimidating. But I will say about the program, there was a lot of support, a lot of kind of the ability to ask questions, but you did also have to hit the ground running and really kind of know your stuff as well. So there was a mix of that. I think one thing that maybe surprised me about working in government was just the range of different things you can do, and also the different topics that are available. I was at environment before, working on climate change. Now I'm at transportation and work on road safety and highways and different topics. And it's amazing just within the public service how many different areas there are and different portfolios that you can work on as a communicator, and also different areas of communications. I started actually in events and then transitioned over to digital, and then now I'm doing strategic communications. So it's there's a lot of different opportunities and topics, and I think that's really valuable to know.
Totally. There is a huge range in the work that we do. That's a really great point. And Naya, again, similarly, where were you placed? What were some of the big things you were like, oh, interesting. Like, I didn't think of it that way. And, tell us a bit about why you always had your pulse on a policy opportunity. And what does that even mean? Policy.
All right. So I started in 2009, which makes me feel incredibly old to say. And my first placement was with the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure, which no longer exists, as now separate ministries, which is the other beautiful thing about government. They put things together, they take them apart, they move them around. So it offers lots of new ways and places to grow, but I knew nothing about energy or infrastructure for that matter. And so that, like, the content learning curve was quite steep, but I got there and I was like, oh, I have all these, like, I can research things, I can take complex ideas and simplify them, I can take simple ideas and complexify them. So that was really useful to be able to figure out sort of who my audience is, what they need to hear, how they need to hear it, and then how I can learn this content and make it into those things. And my policy colleagues who are experts in the content are very generous in teaching me. And that's been sort of one of my big learnings, is I can walk into a room of policy people and be like, hi, I'm the comms person, I don't know what's going on. And they are usually quite generous in breaking things down and explaining to me what they are trying to tell the world, so then I can help them do that in a way that makes sense. They're not always clear on who they're talking to, which is fun. So I also sometimes have to help them figure that part out. But that's been really, really wonderful. And since 2009, I've done pretty much every communications role there is to do in government. And I've tried a bunch of different ministries. For me, sort of work that is situated around social good is really important. So I'm in a ministry that does that stuff, which makes me feel really good. But I also got to play in an agency space, which is really lovely. So agencies of government raise some of their own money. They have a lot more freedom in what they do. And so for those of you who might have heard that government is a little bit constrained and there's a lot of rules to follow, all of that is true. Our agencies have a little bit more flexibility. So whether that's the Heritage Trust, there's a tourism marketing something or the other, I forget what it's called. Cancer Care Ontario is another example. So you can always go and play in an agency space. I don't know that we place interns there necessarily, but there's certainly, once you're in government and you're looking for jobs, those opportunities become available to you. And in terms of sort of working in policy, there's not a lot of embedded communications roles in policy teams. I was lucky to find one. And it means I get to work one-to-one with my policy colleagues on a day-to-day basis. So I have a sense of how everything is moving. And so I can influence things closer to the development phase as opposed to catching it on the tail end and then making suggestions where they're like, well, that would have been nice to know 6 months ago when we first thought about the project. So to influence and sort of help shape and guide them as they think about their audiences and think about how best to share the message with their audiences. Because some of them are like, oh yeah, we'll just put this on the internet. And I was like, cool, no one will ever see it. Also, the internet is not a filing cabinet. So that's been a fun lesson to teach people.
I love that. The internet is not a filing cabinet. I want to post a note that says that. This is great. And you know, we're starting to get some questions in the chat. One thing I do just want to stress to this group is I'm not representing the OIP. I'm representing my experiences in the OIP program. Same with Krista and Naya and Leo. So I can't really answer some of the questions about like, what are they looking for? Like, is it being screened in this way? Because unfortunately, I don't have that, that knowledge. And also we can't be disclosed that knowledge, to be totally honest, just so it's a fair process. But we can get into this first question, which is about, and I'm just going to read it out verbatim. Can you folks talk a little bit more about how your first experience being promoted in the OPS was like? So how did it happen? Did you apply for a careers job? Were you offered a role? I think that's a great question. So I kind of want to pose that to Leo. One, because Leo's moved around and has, you know, some interesting stories to share about how he's moved around. But also I know Leo is actively mentoring current OIP students. So perhaps you can share some of the tips and tricks about kind of moving from intern status to I'm an employee at the OPS.
Yeah, I've been around. Yeah, one of the first things I remember being in as an intern was like just people telling me like, oh, you might think you get paid a lot now, but wait till you get like an actual OPS job. And I was like, what? There's like, that was the most money I'd ever made in my life, was getting into OIP. And like, I was so happy to get that. And to be honest, it's like one of the few internships I even considered because it was paid. Like not everyone's in the position to like do an unpaid internship. That's just the reality. And that was my reality. So, but aside from that, like the question was, what was, sorry, can you repeat the question now?
Yeah, for sure. So like, what was your first experience being promoted after the OIP program? How did it happen? Did you apply for a job? Were you offered a job? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I went the route of most interns, and like I was applying to jobs as soon as I got into like the near end of my contract. But I also had a pretty frank conversation with my manager at the time, and I knew they were interested in keeping me, so I always had that option. And so a big part of the program is building the rapport with your manager and getting to know them and getting to know what their objectives are with like having you stay on after your contract is done. And at the same time, you can be connected to other managers around the public service at the same time. And that's highly encouraged as an intern, just to get the feelers out there. And quite commonly, that's how it happens. Like most people will get offered like a short-term contract out of the internship program. I think the rate right now is like at an all-time high, like almost 95% of people do end up staying with the public service out of the internship program right now. But it can happen a lot of different ways. Like it can be a short-term contract. Usually it'll be like 6 months at a time, and they'll keep renewing you until that position becomes available for competition formally. And then you can get rolled into a permanent role within government or compete for full-time. But when you're on contract, it just means you don't get the full benefits and pension. You can still opt into it if you want, I believe. But yeah, you're going from contract to contract, and that's quite common. And it's a good way, in my opinion, to get more experience outside of the internship program, but also explore different areas of government. Like Naya and Krista mentioned, there's so many areas just within comms itself. Like I've done creative work, I've done social media work. Right now I'm doing digital. So I lead a digital team that manages like accessible web pages and managing and building the web presence for an entire ministry.
Totally. I saw you nodding, Naya. Do you want to add a little bit to that, or jump in with some of your experiences?
Sorry, my nodding gets very aggressive sometimes.
No, it's great. It's great.
So I like, as I was listening to Leo, I was like, yeah, I started in 09. I was actually in a slightly different situation, because when I started, they were like, oh, we're going to cut jobs in the public service. And I was like, great time to start a career in an industry. And so they did. And so by the time I finished my internship, the team that I was on had no budget to keep me, which was pretty sad. And so I actually left government for about a year and a half. I worked at the United Way, and then I worked at a large insurance firm, and well, frankly, I hated it. And I couldn't wait to come back to government. And because I was still in touch with my colleagues, at one point, one of them reached out and said, oh, we have an opportunity that I think would be really, really great for you. Why don't you come in and meet the manager? And I did. And they were just like, oh, we like you. We're going to offer you a position. And so then it was a series of 6-month contracts, which is a little bit nail biting because you never know what's going to happen. And I also stupidly bought a house partway through the process. And I was like, how am I going to pay for this? On a series of 6-month contracts. But what I loved about it was then I could try working in different places and experiencing different cultures. There are over 20 ministries in government. Each of them has a different culture. And then teams within those ministries also have different cultures. So if you end up in one that doesn't have a great fit, you can always just try a different one and see what you end up with. And it gave me a breadth of work experience that I was then able to leverage at interviews when they ask those behavioral questions, like, tell us about a time when, insert scenario. And I was like, oh, I've been in 6 of those. I can give you all these examples. And so working contract was actually quite lovely. And so it's not like, yes, it's lovely to have a permanent job with benefits that you feel secure in. I'm not knocking that, but there is an upside to being on contract as well.
And like full disclosure, I'm on a contract right now too. And so I'm I find it fine. Like there's a bit of flexibility, and I'm able to kind of leverage the fact that like, well, if you want me around, you better put in another contract because I'm looking for work. No, but honestly, like, yeah, it's not black and white. There's definitely a lot of opportunity in contract work. And frankly, right now, in the public service too, 6-month contracts are totally normal. Like that's just the norm. People get 6-month contracts and you continue and you bounce around from each one, and it's just become a normalized reality. Just getting a few questions I just want to quickly address about like sort of, there's this one question from Ivana, if I understand it correctly, it's about, is the opportunity, I guess, for OIP available to those enrolled in a program currently? And the thing with OIP is you can have graduated from a program or a postgrad within 2 years and still be eligible to apply to the program. So if you look on their website, the OIP program very clearly expresses the eligibility requirements. So I would really go through that, and you'd be surprised. There's a pretty big margin of inclusion for eligibility of the program. And then Connor, I know you want us to get into the nitty gritty of how can we set you up for success. But the one thing I will say is just really, really read the program area descriptions and match those as best as you can to the questions being asked of you, especially in the first phase, so that you can really demonstrate that you know that you're well suited for that focus area. So that would be really one piece, a really strong piece of advice. And if you do make it to sort of the next rounds of like interviews or writing tests, just read the instructions and give exactly what's being asked of you. It's really clear. If they ask for 1 paragraph, give them 1 paragraph. If they ask for 5, give them 5. I hope that helps. Okay, I love Gabrielle's question, so I'm going to pose it to Krista. So I'm just going to read it. I've come to understand that the Canada, actually, you know what, Gabby, why don't you ask this question? You're on camera, you're here, and then you can, you know, pose it to Krista, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's like story time. I love it. What a Wednesday. Yeah, so I've come to understand that the Canada School of Public Service offers like a selection of comprehensive development programs and learning series that is intended to support like public servants at all levels and disciplines and departments. So what type of resources and programs are geared towards developing specifically like communicators in government? And did you find them helpful? I ask this because I'm semi-curious about really what are the types of supports that are given to those of you guys like in this space, because from what I've seen and from what I've heard and stuff, there seems to be a few more resources or maybe a few more support and stuff to those in like policy like streams and stuff, or who are coming through maybe some other rotational programs.
This is a tough question, I think, because I mean, within the Ontario Public Service, we have like a little group that puts on like half-day courses and different things like that for government communicators on different topics. And sometimes there'll be people who work in different areas and different ministries who just share their experiences. And I found those to be extremely useful. I've like taken different ones on like storytelling and internal communications, and I took one on stakeholder relations, and there's different courses like that. But when it comes to something that is external, like that anyone could access, I'm kind of struggling to think of something that is government specific. I think like LinkedIn Learning has a lot of interesting courses. CPRS has a lot of interesting, Canadian Public Relations Society has a lot of interesting webinars and things like that, but maybe the other panelists might know of something government specific that's external. I'm not sure.
Or maybe let's broaden the question a bit and just think about like how in general do each of you continue your professional development? And maybe we can end with you, Krista, and start with Naya, because I think that's a really important question for anyone, regardless of what stage in your career you are in.
So my professional development honestly hasn't been super like traditional communications focused, maybe because I'm really arrogant about my ability to write. And so a lot of my work has been in sort of learning how to be a better facilitator. And so I've taken facilitation courses and I've taken negotiation courses with trainers who like are in my personal network outside of the OPS, but the OPS also has a great network of professional facilitators. And so I hang it, like I'll reach out to them if I'm facing a situation where I don't know what to do. And people are quite willing to sort of mentor and support and have those conversations with you. So that's been really great. Other spaces that I've sort of like, I'm really lucky now to work with a policy team that is very generous with their information sharing. And so they've been lovely about bringing me along the journey of, you know, how we start with an idea and end up with a program. Because I was like, I don't know how that actually happens. And I've never seen one from start to finish. And so I'm regularly reaching out to them to ask, you know, how does this decision get made? Did we talk to these stakeholders? Did we forget? And if we did forget, how do we make up for that? And where else can we plug them in? So a lot of my work is actually just like peer-to-peer, colleague to colleague, either reaching out to someone who I know has an area of expertise, or if they're choosing to offer, we do a lot of internal sort of learning opportunities. And like, so you'll sit down and, you know, like at a presentation at lunch or something to that effect. And so most of my like learning has come from there. But outside of that, like I signed up for a master's program 2 years ago. And so there's been a lot of stuff out of there on my off time that I've been learning that's been useful for my career.
What about you, Leo?
Yeah, I would say that in terms of learning and development, I feel like there's so many different avenues and so many different routes. Like there's the more technical side of things that you can learn through like technical training, through like courses that you could take at colleges and universities. And then there's the more government specific. I think you're asking, Gabriella, more about like the government specific, like what you could access as someone that's not within government. Like how do you learn maybe more of the OPS style of writing? I would say that like what we adhere to, like first and foremost, is like CP style. So like just to have that as a background, I think it's a good resource to have, just to show your like acumen to adopt that kind of style and apply it in things that you've worked on, would be something that any manager would look to and like understand like whether or not you have it or not. And then we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but like reaching out to different managers, like in order to find out like what they're looking for in terms of like what skills would serve you well, and either applying through OIP, like once you're in the program or getting into it, or even if you don't get in through the program, like there's ways you can just set up an information interview with a manager and find out like what you have in your toolbox now and what you can like take to the next level in terms of filling in that gap. Like, and it really depends on where you want to go. So a really good resource for me that I found that anyone can access is just, it's called InfoGo. It's just a directory of like everyone in the OPS, like based on their job description. So if you look under communications branches by ministry, it'll list out like all the different areas within a branch. It'll kind of be broken down by like issues management, the more technical digital side of things. And then there's like the strat managers and strat planning. And finding those names within a area that's interesting to you. Like if you're interested in the arts, like reach out to someone in tourism and find out like what kind of files they're working on. I feel like the OPS especially has a great reputation for people just being very willing to share that kind of information. And it's a great way for you to find out like where you're at and what they're looking for, and build yourself up that way.
No, I love that. I think that's a great point. I think I saw Krista in the chat being like, yeah, that's a great point. And I'm wondering, Krista, maybe you have an example where you did something like that, or maybe you can just quickly share like how you ended up in MTO. You know, how did that happen? Like on a high level note, because I know it wasn't like a direct assignment, but it was, I think you were genuinely interested in sort of changing or kind of getting experience in a different team. So what are some of the steps that you took?
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. I'm a living example of that. I was doing digital communications and I wanted to change it up and do something else. And so I did exactly that. I had some informational interviews with some people in other ministries and kind of learned about the different areas. And I found the spaces where my skills could transfer over into a different area of communications. And I do have like an educational background, like from university in traditional communications as well, which helped too. But I think, yeah, Leo made a really great point, just talking to different people. And a lot of people are really, really kind and really open to just chatting to like new grads and students about what opportunities are out there. I think that's one of the best ways to figure out where you want to go and also where your skills can fit.
I love it. I'd like to give Liz an opportunity to ask a question. So, and you've asked a bunch of great ones, so feel free to pick one and we can go off of it.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us. I want to question you guys, which was the ministry which you liked to work with the most and why?
Don't all jump at once. No, but seriously, or does anyone want to take a crack at kind of answering that question? Or perhaps projects or you know, files or things you've worked on that, you know, you've really proud of?
I think I'll just start by saying that, you know, it goes back to, I think Leo made this point too, be really open and, you know, to different opportunities, because a ministry that doesn't sound very exciting on paper might actually end up being totally fascinating. And you can say that like about the Ministry of Transportation. A lot of people, when they hear that I work there, you know, are like, oh, why do you do that? But it's actually a really, really interesting place to work. So I think I've only worked at 2 ministries, so I'm probably not the best person to answer it, but I do think that every ministry has its own kind of interesting pieces, and just don't judge it before you kind of get to know the people that work there and the work that they actually do.
That's a great point. That truly is a great point. I mean, like just myself personally, I went from working what we call a line ministry, so a more a ministry that's honestly just really focused on key files that you know are always going to be associated with it, and they're foundational to the work of that ministry. When you think of transportation, you know, you think of subway planning, you think of road safety, you think of highways. And now I'm working with Leo in what's called a central agency, where we sort of support files that kind of touch all the ministries in some shape or form. And it's a bit more like tentacles kind of spreading around and sort of supporting everyone. So your experiences will be totally different depending on where you sit in this machinery of government, as we call it. And so totally, I just want to reiterate what Krista said, that, you know, don't judge the job by the title it's being presented, because it's also yours to kind of shape as you go through it. And that's why I love the OIP program. When I was in the program, I really wanted to work at cabinet office, but I wasn't placed in cabinet office. And so I worked with my manager for me to work there for a couple of weeks. And it was a great experience. I learned, you know, what it's like to work in a more central part of government. And I think that's the beauty of programs like OIP. It's really for you to shape your experience, as long as you deliver and you're being a great employee and team member. Of course, like, you know, it's in your hands to kind of try different places out, because it's also really hard to understand. Like, government is confusing. You're like, what do they do? It's hard to know until you really get into it. So yeah, but yeah, I don't know. Wonder if like Naya or Leo, you have things to share too on this topic.
I can share. So I've had the luxury of working in a bunch of different places, and there have been ministries where I've absolutely loved the job that I was doing, but the culture wasn't such a great fit, and other ministries where the culture was amazing. And I was like, I don't think I'm adding any value with this job at all. So it's finding both of those things, or some balance of both of those things, that I've sort of worked to find. And I found it with sort of being embedded in a policy team, because I get to influence a bunch of stuff and I love being able to influence things. But the culture is also really, really lovely. And there's a lot of space to learn and to grow and to experiment. And it's safer than it is doing public communications, because the risk there is obviously much higher. Here, I'm mostly communicating internally. And so I can try a bunch of stuff. And the worst thing that will happen is that I look like I don't know what I'm doing, which is on me, as opposed to on a minister's office. So that is sort of one of the other things to think about as well, is like you might find the perfect role and then realize that you don't really want to be there because the culture doesn't gel for you, or the other way around.
Yeah, ditto for me on that point, especially like when you ask like what's the best ministry, it's going to differ for everyone's personality, for their own like professional goals. What Naya probably thinks is a perfect position might be completely a nightmare for me, and like that's just the magic of like any workplace, right? So I think, again, like my first instinct whenever I like see a job posting or like potentially like a project that even sounds interesting, I might want to like throw my hat in the ring. I'll reach out to the people that are close to it, or past people that I know I've worked with similar people, and get the down low, right, on like what it's like, what the culture's like. Is it like an amazing project, but the hours are really, really insane right now on that project? Like it can be very different. For me, like I like working on a team of people that are supportive. I like bouncing ideas off my team. So I look for positions that kind of accommodate that type of work environment. So I'd say everyone's different, and the best way to do it is just to reach out and have these like informal chats, like find out and see if you gel with the people. Like at the end of the day, it's about you and whether or not it's a good fit for you as much as it is for them. So yeah.
And I'll just add to that, what's really cool about the OPS is, and like all the panelists are saying, it's like a whole other world. And there's 60,000 employees in the OPS. So there's a lot of different places that you can influence, or you can contribute to, or you can experience. I mean, honestly, every day I'm learning something new about what the Ontario government either has a hand in, or influences, or helps plan. So it's like once you're in, you're exposed to a whole network of opportunity that you didn't even know existed, which is really, really neat about government. So I want Sophie to ask her a question. I know, Sophie, you're on, you don't have your camera on, which is totally fine. Or yeah, you do, cool. I mean, your question's great. And I thought maybe you can just sort of ask it in your own words on the fly, and then we can go through it.
For sure. I have my camera off because my connection goes a little funky whenever it's on. So just want to kind of do that little disclaimer. If I disappear, that's why. But I was just kind of wondering, in looking at the application, there's a question that's asking to consider the qualities that you own that make you the ideal intern. So I was just, without kind of directly asking what qualities you find make you the most successful, I was wondering kind of what you would say have been the most helpful, or maybe that have hindered your performance within the OPS, and then also maybe kind of wondering which have developed and strengthened as a result of your experience, and anything else you have to share on that would be great.
Honestly, that's such a great question. I'll kick off, because I think the one thing that people forget is you have to be able to roll with the punches as a public servant. We are constantly at the mercy of what's happening around us. And if you're not curious, or if you're not comfortable with ambiguity, or you don't thrive in understanding the world around you and just keeping up, I mean, I think that's like a natural PR tendency. And the same is true of a person who works in communications and government. Like you have to stay on top of things and really be resourceful in knowing what's happening and how it impacts your ministry or your team or your project. So for me, I think that's been one of the most important skills to hone in on and really lean into. But maybe Krista, you can kind of share some of your experience to that question.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think there's the obvious answers, like, you know, being a strong writer, like organizational skills, like knowing communications and like having that training and background in subject matter of communications. But I think one of the things that like often gets potentially forgotten, or at least something that I didn't necessarily realize when I was starting my career that would be a really important skill, is actually customer service and relationship building. And that's something that like I, back in the day, worked at, you know, like Cineplex and Starbucks and was a customer service person. And I didn't really realize how useful those kind of skills would be in my future life. And I think a lot of some of the work that I do is, you know, working with people and delivering bad news to people about things, or explaining a certain situation or why something has to be a certain way. And so there's a real art to relationship building and working with people and working with teams and being a good team player. And I think those skills are important to communications as well.
I want to get through some of these questions. So I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly. Is it Ivana or Ivana? If you're able to unmute yourself and ask your question, your last one, that would be cool.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for doing this panel. I got really excited when I saw it on LinkedIn. We ran a PR conference at Humber some time ago, and this was a huge topic that a lot of people wanted. I feel like our generation is finally caring more about government and that aspect of things over maybe agency. So based on that, I was just wondering I guess now you know, everyone knows about the skills because of the last question. Sorry, I just finished an appointment, but I was wondering, like, based on the trends that are happening in the industry, what do you think are important skills based on the trends, like data management or reporting visually rather than you know, big wordy stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, we're hearing all these things about all the things that a PR professional needs to be and a social media manager needs to be. And to be frank, like sometimes I think some of it's noise. Sometimes I think you kind of have to go back to basics. I think really, it's always important to continue to refine your writing and plain language, like understanding, you know, how can you write for a broad audience and not just for like a very particular or specialized group. But I'd love to hear from Leo, because I know Leo too, like you straddled a lot of different trendy sounding spaces in government.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is basically like know your CP and your CP style and build on those skills, but have your fundamentals down to a T.
Totally. Yeah,
Okay.
totally. I'm curious to hear what Leo thinks too.
Yeah, definitely the fundamentals. And there's another really good question in the chat, but it's how to stand out in the application pool. And keeping in mind that like there's tons of other applicants coming from the same program area as yourselves, like with a communications background. I think I'm a good example of someone that got through without any like formal education in comms. And the way I did that was like standing out a bit, like using what experience I had and applying it to the potential positions that this could like manifest in. So I think one thing that's like a bit of an intangible that I think is going to be key for like anyone working in government, but particularly in communications, is political acuity. So like any project that you might have worked on or job experience that you've had, like even if it's like a group project or volunteer experience, showing that you're able to take a challenging situation and approach it with tact and show how you did it and like demonstrate that you have this type of thinking, like you're able to navigate a tricky situation where like there's stakeholders that might not agree with your position on something and be able to express that and learn from it and show that like there's something to be drawn from like a negative. I think that's something that's really, it can be tough to demonstrate without like having worked within government, but finding the analogs with other projects that you worked on, whether it's a group project in school or a campaign that you've worked on outside of that as well. Like, I think that's something that's going to set you apart. Most people lean it back on like their education, but I don't think that'll set you apart enough as you would like being able to draw on something that's going to be specific to government and can be transferable in that sense. And then make sure there's no spelling mistakes. I look at Krista because she's like an eagle eye. I'll run my stuff by her still. If I'm ever applying to a job, like it's gonna go to Krista. But yeah, that can make or break you. Like believe it or not, like a lot of this stuff may be machine read. I can't say yes or no, but like if a manager sees that, it's like a red flag. And I've seen applicants go for jobs and like that might have been the thing that lost them the job.
Yeah. And I know that, you know, probably a lot of you are in that headspace of just like, you know, mass applying. And I remember it was really stressful. Like coming out of Humber PR, I did not get my first job right away. It did take me some time to land it. And as I said, I didn't get into the program on my first try. And I think it's sometimes important to think quality over quantity. And if you really do take the time to understand, like, especially in PR, I really do think relationships are a currency. I know that was one of the themes in an earlier PR Ramp AMA, and I feel like that resonates for me. Like it's really about those relationships and who works there and how they work and how they share information and how you can contribute to that. So if you do have the opportunity to kind of suss out like, well, who's working there or like, what's it like? And then try and, you know, kind of creatively get in, like that's always helpful no matter where you're working, whether it's like government or whether it's an agency. We're all people. I mean, yes, government, there might be more layers to get into the role, but especially once you're in government, my goodness, like the opportunities you get are based on the people you have formed relationships with. Because when you're in a pinch and you need to hire someone, you don't want to go through a mass list. You want to go to the people that you trust, that you know, that you have a rapport with. So while you're searching, just keep in mind that the PR world is really small. And Krista went to the Centennial program. Like I went to the Hummer PR program. Like there are forging networks and we all kind of connect in strange and interesting ways down the road. So whatever you do now will totally pay off down the road. You really just don't know it yet. We're kind of approaching the end and we've got 3 minutes left. And I do want to kind of ask each panelist to maybe give themselves one piece of advice if they were to be able to talk to themselves at the time that they were applying to the OIP program and have that be sort of a message for everyone in this chat. So maybe let's go with Krista, Leo, and then we'll end with Naya.
Oh shoot, can you hear me?
And now we can't. Now you're muted.
Sorry guys.
Okay, you're good.
So I would say I spent a lot of time worrying about the future And I'd say to my past self to just stop worrying about the things that you can't control, worry about the things that you can. Just keep trying. It's okay if things don't go perfectly, or if you don't get in on your first try, or if you don't get that job, or, you know, just don't focus on those things. And there's supports out there to help you. Like this PR Ramp is an amazing program, and reaching out to people on LinkedIn and all that kind of thing. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, for me, the best advice that I received, like, and I wish I'd heard earlier, was like, share your ambitions, like share your aspirations with everyone you meet, with like any potential employer. Like, they might not be hiring now, but like they will down the line. And if you impress on them that you're someone that's like has a goal and a vision, and it's going to align with theirs down the line, like that's going to linger, and like people aren't going to remember like what you say or what you do. They're going to remember how you make them feel. So have that approach to every single opportunity, like with a manager, with even someone that's not even a manager, like you're just interested in the work they do, like learn from them, share what you want to do. And if your visions align, like down the line, like that's just going to lead to something else. And I've seen a lot of competitions go where someone doesn't win that competition, but another opportunity comes along where that manager has already met you and like interviewed you. They can just ring you up, pull out your resume, and like offer you a short contract, and that leads to something, and that leads to something. And like I'd say the majority of the people I've met have got into their profession or their career that way. And yeah, it just leads to more things. So I think you guys joining this tonight is like a great example of like starting that, and we've made that connection. So
and I'll just add, connect with yourselves, like connect with your peers. Like, you're all here for a reason. So maybe like, you know, while we're wrapping up, like drop your LinkedIn, like literally drop your LinkedIn link in this chat and just be like, hey, I saw you in the PR Ramp, you know, GovComms conversation, because the real goal of this session is to inspire you to think about a career in government. Like, it's exciting, it's different. Leo, Naya, Krista, myself, like we're here to help you. We're here to chat with you and, you know, chat and connect with your peers, like your future colleagues. Naya.
So a couple of things, and this echoes both what Krista and Leo have said. The first thing I would tell my fresh new grad self is that if at first you don't succeed, try again, because it clearly happened the second time around. And to really leverage your network. There's 60,000 OPS employees. There's a lot of us out there. Someone you know is connected to someone in this organization somehow. So if you tell people this is where you want to end up, they'll figure out a way to get you there. Your network is generally, unless it's really truly terrible, in which case, you know, talk to me and we'll see how we can fix it. But they're generally invested in seeing you succeed. And yeah, you never know where your peers will end up. I still call my, colleagues from U of T, who I went to school with, who are now, in city councilors' offices and doing other really great work, and ask them for favors to get other stuff done. So make friends while you're at it.
So we're going to wrap up, but I really do just want to, I want Cassandra and Arvind to unmute themselves and just say hi and good night, because they've been amazing. They've been helping behind the scenes. So quickly say hello and all that jazz, and then I'll let Arvind wrap up.
Hi, yeah, I'm Cass. Yeah, just kind of, Skaidra's definitely overselling what I did, but yeah, I'm the community moderator on Discord for PR Ramp. And if you haven't joined our server, please send Arvind a DM to get an invitation. It is such a wonderful resource. We do AMAs every Wednesday, and it's great networking. So yeah, come introduce yourself. I'm always on there. We can always chat. And thank you so much for doing the first of hopefully what is a series offered by PR Ramp.
Hi, I'm Arvind, as I said at the beginning of the panel. So I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. It's really important to take that time out of your schedule. I know we're constantly going through a cycle of Zoom sessions these days through school and work, and sometimes at the end of a long day, you really just don't have the energy to sit at your computer any longer, especially when you're going through the pain of job hunting, that extra pressure that goes into your brain and that brain fog that you have to fight against. It takes a lot of energy. So honestly, like be proud of yourselves because you showed up, and by using our services, by connecting with each other, by reaching out to potential mentors, you're continuing to show up for yourselves, and that is going to pay off. And I would love to hear feedback regarding this panel. So the same email you asked for an invite on, if you want to share any feedback, if you have any future topics you would like other panels on, please let me know so that PR Ramp can work on organizing it. And I am gonna just share my screen real quick just to show you guys where you can get connected with us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and just through email as well. So these are our handles. You can find us on Twitter at PR_ramp. On LinkedIn, we're super easy to find, just under PR Ramp. And then our general PR Ramp email is comms@prramp.com, where you can ask general questions. Or if you want to be connected to any of the mentors on our roster, please reach out. And if you're looking for any student recent written pieces on their internships or any previous information on past Ask Me Anythings or a recording of this panel, it's going to be on prramp.com. Thank you so much for attending today.
Bye, everyone. You do a wave. Take care. Be well. Be safe. Stay home if you can. Cheers.